to investigate such a thing, it appears that Indians have concerned themselves with making their environs and themselves smell good. The sensualist dandies and master perfumers of yesteryear have led culture of fragrance aesthetics, not entirely surprising in a land that's home to 18,500 varieties of aromatic plants. From the voluptuous allure of the rose to the musky tang of oud, the woody notes of sandalwood to the heady smell of jasmine, and the lingering aroma of vetiver, fragrances unlock something at the heart of India. In this vivid narrative that blends the science of aromatics with travel, history and insights into India's contemporary perfume trade, Divrina Dhingra investigates the idea of scent as a powerful trigger for memories and emotions, as well as a mode of self-expression and identity. In her telling, aromatic ingredients are not a mere indulgence, but the backbone of the country's struggling perfume industry and a source of livelihood for many. A compelling, unusual narrative by a writer schooled in the art of perfumery. So, Devrina, let's begin with how this idea for this book struck you. Why did you write this book?
The idea was just, I would say that the main driver for this book was really my own curiosity about fragrance. I sort of got more curious about it. I was doing my masters. I was writing a lot, so unrelated things, and I was abroad. I was, visiting a lot of just like these fragrance boutiques in my free time because just really stress, anti-stress measures, and began to notice when you look a little closer into ingredients, just the little bit of information that they give you has this, many of them still have this very Orientalist leaning. And I've mentioned in the book that I think fragrance is one of those last bastions of Orientalism as it used to be. And got a little curious about the stories of the ingredients and where they come from. And then I think that just I had that in my mind, that idea brewing in my mind for a few years really, and then I came back to India and decided that I'm still curious about this. I want to learn about this. And that's really how it began. I just began reading about it. Somewhere along the way also began working with a perfumer on her brand to get like the practical experience of it. And then when I started reading and doing research, I just found that there was nothing to read that actually told me the stories that I wanted to hear. So there was also this idea of wanting to write what I wanted to read myself.
And I found this book very original when I read it first, and what struck me is that I knew nothing about Kanauj and Madurai. I mean, you use the perfumes that your book tells you, the ingredients come from these places, you're just vaguely aware, but your book brought that out, and it's like the flap says, it's also traveled. And talk about Kanauj. And I mean, after your book, I think more and more people are recognizing that the ancient processes that are used in these places, and so talk about going to Kanauj and going to Madurai, going to Srinagar, and drawing out all that.
So I think you're right when you say people aren't really aren't really aware of these ingredients but I would say in general that um, we all take for granted our sense of smell to begin with, because it's involuntary. You're breathing and you're smelling, and so all the other senses take up a lot more space. And then then you realize that in India we have like this wealth of ingredients, this wealth of history, that is all around fragrance. When you start talking about fragrance in India, you start like reading about it, thinking about it. Kannauj is really at the center of everything. Because it's been a center for production and distillation for decades now. So, for decades as the center of distillation as we know it, the distilleries were sort of set up there post-independence. but it's been the center of a kingdom from antiquity. So Kannauj has very much a place in history, and all the other places that I went to were just in order to sort of contextualize each of these ingredients, because I've taken 6 ingredients and written about Indian fragrance through them. And then, each one is sort of very firmly rooted geographically. So if you want to talk about saffron, you can't not go to Kashmir to see the harvest and to see how it's processed over there. And when you learn about the history of it, again, Kashmir is, so central to it. I mean, they were sort of synonymous. Saffron just used to be called Kashmira. Um, so that's how closely they're associated. And the same with Madurai. If you're talking about jasmine, you will go to Tamil Nadu to see the production of jasmine and see how central it is and has always been to life over there. Even if you take out the fact that now it's processed there, now India produces the world's sort of best known, most expensive, and absolutely beautiful Jasmine Absolute. That may be a more modern sort of invention, the way that it's done. But the fact that it's grown there always, and has just been like a part of the rhythm of life, because these are the flowers that are used in temple worship. These are the flowers that make their way into sort of women's daily lives, into homes, and that has been carrying on for centuries. And then the same, of course, when you go to, if you're talking about sandalwood, and then you can't not talk about sandalwood if you're talking about fragrance in India. And then you have to go to Mysore. And Mysore sandalwood is the world's best known, best loved, and most mourned at this point, because it's pretty much gone extinct. We had it's indigenous to the Deccan Plateau, the forests over there, and it's just been wiped out, because these were, we had massive forests, old growth trees. Sandalwood trees are very slow to grow. Um, they just got poached out of existence, and so it's now so rare, and people talk about like Mysore sandalwood with this kind of like longing in their voices if you speak to perfumers. And then you have to go to these places to understand Indian fragrance. You have to travel around the country. You can't do it sitting in a library in Delhi. You can't do it even going to Kannauj. But Kannauj, I will say, is, for anyone who's curious about the subject, is worth a visit. You're right in saying subsequently, and there's been a lot more interest in the place. There's been a lot more interest in the fact that one of the reasons Kannauj is so well known is because the process of distillation that they're using is such an ancient process that is carrying on in exactly the same way. That particular sort of models of that deg and bhapka that is used even now are preserved in a museum of archaeology in Takshila, and it's dated to about 3000 BC.
Wow.
Um, and so you go there to see this and to see how they are producing rose oil, how they are producing vetiver essential oil, how they are producing attars, which are a blend of different ingredients. They're doing it still in this really labor intensive, very beautiful, very difficult way, actually, that they have been doing for thousands of years. And so that is very much a part of the identity of fragrance in India.
Okay. And also what struck me when I read your book is that the people who are actually laboring on these ancient, practices, they're not rich, or, the actual laborers, they're probably very poor, but they're really proud of their knowledge, which clearly is hereditary, I suppose. But
For the most part.
for the most part. But how long do you think that's going to go on? Because, in the modern world, everybody wants to
Yeah, I mean,
have
I
money.
agree with you. This is something that I touched upon in this book, and I think it's been it's been my one regret is that I didn't say more about it, because in fact this entire industry now rests on the shoulders of these karigars, and it's hard work, it's labor, and it's a hierarchical system. I don't think you can divorce it from bigger questions of caste and livelihood, when it comes to this. But I think in now this kind of thing, Kannauj is famous, but it's really dwindled to like this um, little artisanal cottage industry. People go there to take the photographs, to make the films, but in fact production has been reducing.
Oh.
And yeah, like you said, the knowledge that they have is not knowledge that you can acquire outside of from doing. So you do and you learn, but when you speak to them, this is not what they want their children to do. I think you see that in a large number of cases when it comes to these industries of craft in the country, that in general, we're really spoiled for choice in this country when it comes to these things. And so we've had this kind of very laissez-faire attitude to it, and really it's to our own detriment. um, so but the karigars are really the linchpin of the entire thing. You can't do this without them.
Okay, and what also struck me was, in your book, you made this point about the connection between, the big Parisian perfumeries and places like Madurai, So let's talk about that.
That is basically, like I said, so if you speak about Kannauj, and then like the sort of the other name that comes up is Grass, which is, so Kannauj became like the Grass of the East, although it's a much older city,
That
much
should be the
older.
Kannauj of the West.
Yeah, and Grass is where they have all the production for French fragrance really began over there. And the reason it began over there was because Grasse originally had a lot of tanneries in the, I think, 18th century, and the tanneries produced these like leather gloves for women, but to mask the smell of this like leather and the raw leather, these sort of floral waters and fragrances began to be developed in that area. That's how it became a center for fragrance in France. It still is. Like my school is there. There are other schools there, and they used to have fields over there. One of those is jasmine, and it's really celebrated over there. They have a festival around jasmine. They have these little fields, but in fact those fields now are pretty much a showcase. They're not producing enough to actually use in their fragrances. That got outsourced to other countries, um, as with many things that are produced in the West. And so, it's undoubtedly the production for things like jasmine has moved to either Egypt or to India, the different species. But when you talk about sambac jasmine, um, the best goes from India. So French perfumers come to Madurai, they come to Tamil Nadu, they come to India pretty often, to work out, like, the terms of like what they're going to buy, where it's produced, things like that. And yeah, so a lot of these oils and absolutes are making their way all over the world.
Okay, and before we throw it open to questions from the audience, maybe one last question. Oh, okay. Somebody wants to ask a question? Oh, I have 10 more minutes. Okay, great. So, right. So, you mentioned about learning more about perfumery and enrolling in a course, right? So, talk about that, the experience of it, and
Yeah.
how it has, I think it made the book much richer.
I think it made it much easier for me, definitely, that I was not anymore. I mean, I think when I began the book, I hadn't begun studying. And then through the book, my own perspective on everything changed because I was also sort of, so to say, behind the scenes and working in a lab and things like that. So it made it easier for me to, I think, write about fragrances, because the first thing you learn in school is that you go in and you start smelling and you memorize hundreds of ingredients. So you have to develop a vocabulary around it. I think it's difficult to write um, about fragrance because it doesn't have its own vocabulary. It's a borrowed one. But that made it easier for me to describe and to write. But of course, it also gave me a deeper understanding of these natural ingredients. You know how rare they are, how they, why they cost as much as they cost, why you will buy a really expensive perfume sometimes, and what the breakup of those things is, why it's so expensive, and just, I think, a lot more respect, really a lot more respect for the ingredients, for the people who are producing it, growing it, because it's like all kinds of farming. It's kind of like this mammoth exercise. It's so intensive, and now it's so fragile because climate change really is playing havoc with these things. So you don't know how long you have them for.
Really?
Yeah, in many cases, like, things like, for example, if you talk about vanilla, vanilla is so expensive. Natural vanilla, it's a hand pollinated now. So pollinators are like dying out. When you talk about saffron, their yields are just getting smaller and smaller because they rely on snowfall and rainfall to for the calendar, for when the bulbs are planted, for when the things are harvested. All of that is now being thrown out of gear. When I spoke to the gentleman whose fields I went to for the vetiver, in North India, vetiver is what is called a wild harvest, which is an oxymoron, but it means it's not cultivated. So in the north, it's a different variety of vetiver from the south. In the south, they cultivate it. In the north, they just collect it. It grows wild, and the area that they used to collect it from was so much bigger than what it is now. So you have less, and then because those lands are being developed, they're no longer farmland, and then because you need it to be the coldest part of the year is when you harvest these things, but it just isn't that cold anymore. It's so unpredictable, so the yields are lower, and they don't have an answer to this. When you ask them, so what do you think is, your grandfather did this, your father did this, now you're doing it. How long do you think this will carry on? They say, we'll do it as long as we can, but you can't say.
Yeah, vetiver. And when I was reading your book, I was thinking, where exactly are they picking it from? So, I mean, you do see wild vetiver growing, I mean, if you look for it. But if you're going to pick it, and then we are also kind of a country that's on a very rapid growth trajectory in terms of roads and buildings. So I don't see how long you're going to have this wild thing growing.
Yeah, it's you know nowhere else in the world do you still really have like these wild harvests. It's really rare now because everywhere you've had this problem of like where there used to be plants growing wild, there aren't anymore for various reasons. So yeah, this is something that the villagers will sort of dig up the roots and then bring it to the middleman who'll buy it from them, and then it gets distilled. So it's an entire chain. Many livelihoods depend on this like industry, and it is all a little bit on shaky ground.
Okay. So, what was the one thing that, I mean, this is a general question. What was the one thing that really surprised you when you were like doing the research for this book?
I think it was like the history, just how far back these things go, and in some cases, particularly for oud, because for me that was the ingredient that I really wanted to write about, but had the least familiarity with, and Then I went to Assam and found that, you know, it's such a rare um, oil and such a rare wood. And then you go to Assam and it's just growing everywhere. People have it in their backyards. Everyone will like try and grow one or two agar trees. It's a kind of insurance. You know, they know that like when this tree is old enough, like 15 years old or whatever, you can sell that wood to the middleman comes through the villages, and then you have like three grades of these middlemen. They're the ones who come on their bikes, and the ones who come on their cars, and then the ones who are the agents for the big dealers. And that determines how much you'll get for your tree. But if you have one, you know that you can sell it because you have to pay for a child's education, or maybe you have some medical expenses that need to be covered. So that's your little insurance over there. And so that was really like quite fascinating to see, the contrast between the way it's treated in the place that it's like indigenous and it's a part of life, versus like the way you deal with these things once they've reached your lab. The reverence and the because you're so aware of the expense, and you talk about the notes and the provenance, and then you go and see that provenance, and it's quite a different world.
Okay. So how long did you work on this? I mean,
Many years. I'm gonna say I think it took me altogether from the time that I thought of it to the time that I published it, like 7 years, which is probably just me taking a really long time. But there was the pandemic in between, so
so
that's
then
my
how
excuse.
did you handle that? I mean, because this is like, a lot of travel and you actually gone to these places and it's like primary research, a lot of it.
Yeah, so
So,
I had to do those 2 years, that had to stop, and so I used that time to do as much of the secondary research and the book research and the combing through the library books and stuff as I could. But it did, yeah, it really slowed it down.
okay. Okay. So I think we should throw open a thing to the audience for questions.
Thank you. That's very fascinating.
Thank you.
I'm just curious about oud because I grew up in Assam and I don't think I've ever seen a tree. So, which part of Assam are these trees
So I
growing?
went to sort of Upper Assam, Jorhat, and Titavur, and that's where I saw them. And they also grow them in quite often in tea plantations, because this is a tree that sort of thrives over there. I mean, it's native to the area, but it's also one of those trees where where if there's been soil erosion or the heavy metals in the soil, it doesn't matter. The tree will grow anyway. So
Wonderful. Second question before I hand the mic back. Where do you think nature similar perfumes? They are now trying to save the real growth of perfuming plants by creating artificial perfumes that mimic the real ones. So, where do you think that? What role does that play?
that is, I mean, synthetic ingredients are not new. They've been around for a very long time. And as someone who works with them, I would say they play like a very, very important role. Many of them are, I think synthetics just get like they just get a bad reputation for no reason. Many of them are isolates of natural. So if you take a natural ingredient, it's so complex, it has thousands of molecules, and isolates are often just exactly that, they're isolated molecules of those ingredients. But also in the case of things like ingredients that are now endangered, like an oud or like a sandalwood, you have so many molecules that have been synthesized to mimic the smells that are really useful, really beautiful. And I think the best example of this is musk, because musk has been illegal. Natural musk is pretty much been illegal since the 60s. And so the first musk molecules were sort of synthesized a few decades ago. They've won Nobel Prizes, and now they've been through many iterations. You had the nitro musks and the polycyclic musks and the macrocyclic musks, and the whole industry rests on those. So I would say they're really very, very important.
Hi, my name is Veena. Um, one thing I wanted to check with you is, are animals also as sensitive as human are for these smells and scents? Like you mentioned vetiver. So you just crush it, we get a, we like to, as humans, we like to squeeze and smell it up like mint. So
I would assume that animals are a lot more sensitive because they have they rely on this,
Smells.
for them smell is not incidental the way it is to us. So they're probably a lot more sensitive than we are.
But they don't seem to be hoarding any of these dried things, so that just struck me.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
They don't hoard, like when they're building nests or laying their lair. Do they pick up these dried things to line so that it becomes more aromatic? I've never.
No, that's probably unlikely. I mean, if you have any pets at home, you can just experiment. You give them any of these and they're going to run a mile. It's just too much for them.
So one follow-up question: are you a smell person?
I am now a smell person,
Okay,
yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Hello. Ma'am, I wanted to ask you about certain animals are endangered because of people hunt them for musk deer and sperm whales. So are there plants like that which are endangered because of production of perfumes?
I would not say that the plants are endangered because it's not, but cultivation has become much harder in many cases because of climate change. And so the big companies, big perfume companies are trying to develop solutions, biopods and things like that to simulate the right conditions for many of these very sensitive plants so that the yields and that the oil that is acquired from them still smells the same, has the same potency. So I mean, you could say that they all are. It's become much harder. Natural ingredients are going to become rarer, more expensive.
And what about musk deer and sperm whales and all? Are they still hunted for these purposes?
No, natural musk has been illegal for this very reason because you had to kill the musk deer to get to the musk pods. So that's not allowed. In the case of whales, they were never hunted for, I assume you're talking about ambergris, but ambergris is still, so firstly, natural ambergris is not really legal to use. You have synthetic equivalents, but you didn't have to hunt a whale for the ambergris because ambergris was like whale puke. So you either found it in the ocean, and sometimes they still do, but we don't use the natural in perfumery anymore.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi. Yeah, I wanted to check if so there are people who are primarily into food tasting or into coffee Q grading where they smell coffee and come up with various words. Like a coffee would taste like black coffee, but they might come up with things like it tastes like the rain or like an old book. So is it some way similar to what you feel or are they completely different signs?
I mean, it's similar in the way that we also smell a lot of ingredients, but I have to tell you, as someone who's smelled a lot of ingredients, if I had to smell wine or coffee, I can't do what they do. To me, it smells like wine and it smells like coffee, and I'm not able to discern those notes and things that they talk about. So it's really a question of really training your nose for that. I could probably smell a rose and tell you something about it, but not food.
Hi, Divrina. So I've actually read your book, and it was very interesting, very well researched. So congratulations on that. And
Thank you.
also, you said that curiosity led you to write this book on just because of the subject. So is there something else that you're currently curious about and probably researching to write your next book?
I'm working on it. I'm really still sort of letting it marinate, so I'm not going to say too much. But I will say that, yeah, it seems to be the case for me that I just have to get really curious about something, and then that leads me down like these rabbit holes.
Okay, I'll ask the last question then. I found your writing very sensitive. So I was wondering if you would ever consider, I mean, this is non-fiction, but what about fiction? You know,
Um,
would you?
around this subject or in
No,
general?
no, in general, because,
I mean, I think I would love to be able to write fiction. I've never tried, of course. I don't think I've gotten all the non-fiction out of my system as yet. Because once you're a journalist, you, I think, feel the need to like document stuff and write stuff. But I will say that 90% of my own reading is fiction. So I really admire fiction readers. It's very aspirational for me to maybe one day get there.
okay. Any more questions?
No, ma'am. Our time is up.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you everyone
Thank
for being
you.
here.